My name is Brian Angulo. I will be presenting on the significance of La Oroya, Peru, on the topic of global environmental health. La Oroya is a city in the high Andes of Peru and is unfortunately most known for its reputation of being among the most polluted cities in the world. This presentation will elaborate on the history of why that is and the real-life implications of what has occurred at the site. So here are the objectives of this presentation. So one is to understand the history of environmental contamination of La Oroya, Peru. Two is to understand the impact of various contaminants on human health. And three is to understand how social justice is related to environmental health. For a brief table of contents, first we'll start on a background of the issue. Next, we'll go into the impact of various contaminants on human health. Next, we'll discuss the timeline of the La Oroya foundry and its operations. And finally, we'll touch upon the La Oroya foundry as the source of contamination. So La Oroya, Peru, as pictured here, is located at an altitude of 3,700 meters in the Andes, 175 kilometers from Lima along the Central Highway and the Mantaro River in Yauli province. It is surrounded by rugged mountains, which makes the area susceptible to temperature inversions that trap pollution over the city. The city had emerged without planning at the side of the complex. As you can see here, on the left-hand side are the homes, on the right-hand side, beyond the river is the foundry. So for this reason, the city center is only, mere meters from the smelter. La Oroya is a long, thin city, and it lies along a central highway and the Mantaro River, surrounded by peaks of the Andes. 65% of the population of Yauli province, which is where the city is located, are below the poverty line, and most of the community lacks basic services. La Oroya has around 30,000 inhabitants, and for many of them, work at the local smelter is the primary income source. So the complex was built in 1922 by the U.S. Cerro de Pasco Copper Corporation. It consists of three main metallurgical circuits: a copper circuit, which was operating since 1922, a lead circuit operating since 1928, and a zinc circuit operating since 1952. So the circuits included smelting and refining processes for these metals, as well as some other processes to produce cadmium, silver, gold, and other metals. So to understand how metal production may yield toxins, this figure, which should be coming up soon, so this this figure here shows how the first step in processing is called beneficiation, in which the size of the material is regulated by crushing and grinding, improving the quality and purity through separation of the materials with lesser metallic content. So this is the first step, which produces waste materials, and they're called tailings, and these are often toxic because of residual metal and chemical content. And further on, further concentration of the metal and mineral is yielded, and creates more and more toxic material and contamination that could leak into the environment if not properly handled. So studies have demonstrated that in the majority of cases, the different steps of this process generate large quantities of contaminants that are toxic to human health and the environment. And so these are several contaminants that have been found to have been released at the La Oroya facility. And this table displays the toxic effects of these contaminants and treatment options for both, whether you've been exposed at low levels or chronically exposed, etc. And as you can see, there's not really much. Not only are the toxic effects quite severe, but there's not much in terms of treatment. There's not much to offer. Most commonly for heavy metals, the therapy is chelation therapy, but this is not without severe side effects. And it's also worth mentioning that for all these contaminants, the populations most at risk are elderly, children, and the workers who are directly exposed to the smelting process. But for a city like La Oroya, where most of its inhabitants have relied on the smelting complex for work, it's not hard to understand how great the scope of contamination can be with regard to human health. So to understand the toxicity of lead, I'll refer to a study that treated a group of mice to low levels of lead in drinking water over a 45-day period. So although this is an animal study, we can reasonably extrapolate the findings to the effects of lead on humans. So the x-axis here represents the concentration of MHPG, which is a metabolite of norepinephrine. And as you can see here, for each brain region, the difference in the mean MHPG levels between the control and experimental groups was found to be very significant. So this line graph thus shows that for mice with low levels of exposure to lead, they've had an increase in norepinephrine synthesis, release, and metabolism in the brain, which supports the claim that lead behaves as a chemical stressor. Studies have linked that, lead as and its subsequent effects as a chemical stressor have had significant impacts on learning and also memory defects. It's also been well demonstrated that increases in norepinephrine levels produce amnesia. So here's a timeline of the environmental impact of the La Oroya complex on local community health. As discussed previously, the complex began its operations in 1922, and then the complex became nationalized by the government in 1974. Subsequently, there was an environmental management and mitigation program that was approved in 1996, and then the La Oroya complex was purchased by Doron, Peru in 1997. And after a study in 1999 that found lead poisoning among children in the La Oroya community, that was the impetus for, activism on the part of community members and NGOs. And in 2009, the case of La Oroya community versus Peru was admitted by the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights. And it was only until 2021 when the IACHR established that the Peruvian government was responsible for rights violations, and it referred the case to the Inter-American Court. So, yes. And so from a separate study, this shows the site location map for, the La Oroya community. So there were 5 study locations, and this was mainly to measure, is the pollution, can it be attributable to the facility, the foundry in La Oroya? And so this map kind of shows where, La Oroya is situated, and then the red circles are other monitoring sites for contaminants, and the black squares represent air monitoring sites. And so this bar graph shows how, blood lead estimates by age, for different age groups. The highest blood lead estimates across all age groups was within the La Oroya community. Of course, there's a, Yauli city, which is quite far away. However, the study found that this contamination from lead in the children in that area was likely from a different source. For instance, lead paint, which is quite popular and commonly used and sold in rural areas of Peru. And then this pie chart shows just, the significance of exposure between lead, cadmium, and arsenic. So, although there is a significant of the exposure to children was lead, there was also a significant amount of arsenic exposure as well. So lastly, to summarize, these are some points. So the La Oroya foundry operated for 87 years continuously from 1922 until it was shut down in 2009. During its operation, the foundry contributed to soil, air, and water contamination of the surrounding area with heavy metals and sulfur dioxide. And only within the last 2 decades has action really been taken for the recognition of the environmental and public health impact of the foundry. And lastly, through search, news media reports have released within the last year of this video's posting that the La Oroya foundry may reopen. This is because the economy of the city heavily relies on this smelting operation. And once actually the foundry was closed, many people were out of work. And so actually a lot of workers are petitioning to reopen the smelter. But of course, they say that they want commitment to environmental safety and a plan to safely dispose of the contaminants. Finally, here are some references. Thank you.